In this video, I'll give you an overview of how to get started building your own guitar pedals. I'll go through the different options you have for DIY guitar pedals, the essential equipment you need, and the basic steps to follow to get started building your first guitar pedal. By the end of this video, you'll know what type of guitar pedal is right for you to start with, what you need to look for, and the steps you'll need to go through to build your pedal. For a detailed look at anything I cover in this video, check out the guide to building guitar pedals on my website. Check out the link in the description for step-by-step tutorials, specific tool recommendations, and other detailed tutorial videos on building guitar pedals. Let's start by looking at the essential and optional equipment you'll need to build any guitar pedal. The first and most obvious thing you'll need is a soldering iron and solder. While I'm sure there is somebody out there who sells solderless kits, if you're interested in building guitar pedals, you'll need to learn how to solder. Now, if you've never soldered anything before, this might seem intimidating, but it's a fairly basic skill you can learn in no time. Knowing how to use a soldering iron is a handy skill to have, as you can use it in the future to change your guitar pickups, add a push-pull pot to your guitar, or any other guitar modifications. Okay, so if you've been avoiding building a guitar pedal because you don't know how to solder, don't stress. It might feel awkward the first few times, but you'll quickly get the hang of it, especially if you spend a bit of time practicing with scrap wires. You can buy a decent soldering iron kit from Amazon, eBay, or any electronics store. I used the dirt cheap one for a long time before upgrading to one for temperature control. Being able to adjust the temperature gives you more control over your soldering, and you'll find it easier overall. For solder, I go into detail on the different types you can get in the guide. The solder I personally use is a 60/40 lead-based solder, but depending on where you live, the type of solder you can buy may be very different to what I talk about. I know that some countries ban lead-based solder, so see what's available in your country. There are lots of tools you can buy to make your job easier, but for a bare minimum, I suggest getting a decent set of wire cutters and a wire stripper. Yes, you can find all-in-one tools, but it's much easier to have separate tools for stripping the wire and cutting the wire. Other tools such as needle nose pliers are handy when you're trying to work with tiny components. You'll also need a multimeter, which is a handy device you use to check connections and test your circuits. When you make a mistake, and it's okay, you will make a mistake at some point, a multimeter can help you track down the mistake. Multimeters might look intimidating, but after you watch one or two videos explaining how to use them, you'll find that they're simple and handy to have. Alligator clips are something that aren't essential, but they make it easier to test your circuits and try out any mods before you wire them up. Another option but very useful tool to buy is something called a third hand. This is something that you use to hold a component or some wires or your board in place as you solder. You can buy one that only has one arm to hold things, or you can buy one with two or more arms with or without a magnifying glass. You can build pedals without one of these, but it does make things less fiddly. If you watch my pedal build tutorial videos, you'll see that I use Blu Tack to hold parts in place while soldering, so that's an option. But once I bought a third hand, it was obvious how useful they are. Another option but recommended thing to have on hand is a fan to blow solder fumes away. A cheap and small desktop USB fan is more than enough to keep you from breathing in toxic fumes. The last optional piece of equipment I'll suggest here is a magnifying headset. If you have good eyesight, you can skip this, otherwise they make dealing with tiny components so much easier. You'll look ridiculous while wearing them, but wow do they make soldering tiny components on a PCB so much easier. I go through a few more tools and equipment to consider in my full guide, but this gives you the basics to consider. Now that we've covered the tools and equipment you might need, let's look at the different levels of difficulty involved in building pedals. It's handy to look at building guitar pedals in terms of difficulty, because there's a big difference between building a simple kit pedal and designing a guitar effect from scratch. If you get into this hobby, you can work your way through the levels and learn new skills along the way, or you can stick to the easiest level and still enjoy building your own custom pedals. The first level is to mod an existing pedal. I call this level 0 because it's a step below actually building your own pedal. At this level, you start with a pedal you can buy from a store, then modify it by replacing some components or adding new features to it. There are a lot of guitarists who share mods for pedals online, so it's an easy starting point if you're interested in getting into pedal building. You'll use the same skills such as soldering and following diagrams like you do in building kit pedals, but it's less overall work. If you already have some guitar pedals, have a search to see if there are any interesting mods you might want to try on your pedals. Not every pedal can be modded, and you do run the risk of breaking a pedal, so you might want to try this only after you try building a few kit pedals. Now, the first real level of building your own guitar pedal is to buy a kit. Think of this like building a Lego set. You start out with a bag full of components and an instruction sheet, and you need to put it all together. The great thing about building guitar pedal kits is that it makes the process as simple as possible. You don't need to figure out what components to buy, you get everything you need in the kit, and the included instructions will hopefully label and number everything to make it simple. This is how I started and what I recommend for most people. Even if you've never dealt with electronics before, you will be able to build a full pedal with a kit. Check out my build tutorial videos on the 7-minute fuzz pedal and my Klon Centaur clone to see this level of pedal building in action. The next step up from buying a kit is to buy the PCB, which is a printed circuit board, and put your own kit together. This level isn't any harder than building a pedal from a kit, it only requires more knowledge about components. Once you find a PCB for a pedal you want to build, you need to source all the correct components separately. The good news is that there are many electronics and DIY guitar pedal websites where you can easily source all the components you need in one place. Once you build a couple of kits, I suggest giving this level a try if you enjoy building pedals and you really want to get into the hobby. You can buy cheap packs of bulk components, which brings down the cost of future builds. I've built a few pedals this way, and once you wrap your head around the variety of components you'll find in pedals, this is as easy as buying a kit, and it's usually significantly cheaper. The next step up from buying a pre-made PCB is to create your own. Some guitarists create their own PCBs because they can't find a pre-made one for an effect they really want to build. Other guitarists create their own PCBs because it frees them up to build anything they want. Etching your own PCB is a completely separate skill to learn, and from my experience, it involves a lot of trial and error. Alternatively, you can use software to design your own PCB and have it manufactured for you. A lot of people freely share PCB design files, and it's surprisingly cheap to have them manufactured. I only suggest attempting this level once you've built a few pedals using a pre-made PCB and you feel comfortable with sourcing your own components separately. The final level in building pedals is to design a pedal on your own. An example of this level is to start with a schematic of a pedal such as a tube screamer, modify the circuit to suit you, then design and order your own PCB or etch your own. Or you can learn the principles of how circuits work and you can design a pedal from scratch using prototyping equipment such as a breadboard. This level obviously requires a good understanding of circuits and electronics, but it's a level anybody can reach if you really want to. It will take time to learn everything, but there are a lot of guitarists who do this. If you like the idea of creating your own unique pedals and possibly selling them, you might want to work your way up towards this level. Now that you know the different levels of building guitar pedals, let's have a quick run through of the components and hardware you'll be using. Having a basic understanding of what different components look like makes the job of building a pedal far less intimidating. You don't need to know what the components do at this stage, knowing what they look like is enough for now. The first thing you'll use is a pedal enclosure. These come in different sizes to suit different projects. The 1590B enclosure is one of the most common, but the right size for your pedal depends on the size of the PCB and other components. Most kits will come with a suitably sized enclosure. If you build a level 2 pedal, where you buy a PCB and source your own components, avoid the temptation to cram everything into a tiny enclosure such as a 1590A. Start with larger enclosures, and as you gain experience, you can try out some smaller enclosures. This Fuzz Factory clone I built is a good example of what not to do. While everything fits in this enclosure, it would have made much more sense to use a larger enclosure so the foot switch would be further away from the knobs and easier to hit. Let's quickly run through the most common components and what they look like. I'll also give a brief description of what the components do, but as a minimum, just try and remember what each component looks like. Resistors look like small cylinders with coloured bands indicating their resistance value. They limit the flow of the current in a circuit. They're essential for controlling voltage and current within the circuit, and you'll find them in every guitar pedal project, sometimes a lot of them. When building a pedal, you can use an app or look up the coloured bands to find the right resistor. Capacitors look like small cylindrical or rectangular components with two leads coming out of them. Some capacitors need to be installed in a specific way to work, where there is a defined positive and negative end, while others can be installed either way. They store and release electricity. Diodes are usually small cylindrical components with a stripe indicating the negative end. They need to be installed the correct way or they won't work. This is because diodes allow current to flow in only one direction, so if you install them the wrong way, they can mess up the flow of electricity. If you rarely get into building guitar pedals, you'll hear a lot of debates over diodes and which ones are best. You may have already heard about germanium and silicon diodes with fuzz pedals. A common mod for fuzz pedals is to swap out the diodes for different types. Transistors are little black boxes or silver cylinders with 3 leads. Transistors act as switches or amplifiers for electrical signals. You'll see transistors in pretty much every pedal you build. Integrated circuits, or ICs, are complex components that contain their own circuitry. They're typically small, black rectangular chips with multiple pins. ICs are usually mounted on sockets when building guitar pedals. LEDs are the lights you see on pedals. LED stands for Light Emitter Diode. They emit light when a current passes through them. They're typically small, clear, or colored bulbs with two leads. Just like regular diodes, LEDs need to be installed in a specific direction in your pedal or they'll burn out. There's usually a short and long leg to help you install them the right way, and many LEDs have a flat end to tell the legs apart. Switches are mechanical devices that can open or close an electrical circuit. The most common type of switches you'll see in guitar pedals are the ones used for foot switches, buttons, and toggle switches. Switches control the flow of electricity by manually breaking or making a connection. One thing I'll mention with foot switches is that there are two main types you can buy, latching and momentary. It's important to know the difference between these options. Latching foot switches are what you'll find on most guitar pedals. You press it once to turn the effect on and it stays on after you release the switch. When you press it again, the effect turns off. In other words, the switch alternates between open and closed every time you press and release it. A momentary switch will only activate while you hold the switch down. Momentary switches are sometimes found on pitch-based pedals or switches for tap tempo. If a DIY pedal doesn't say which type to use, you can assume that it's going to be a latching foot switch. Connectors are how you connect your guitar pedal to power or to your guitar and amp. You'll obviously see at least two of these in every pedal, one for an input cable and one for an output cable. If you want to use a battery on a pedal, you'll also use a battery connector. PCBs are what you solder all the components to. PCB stands for Printed Circuit Board, and they manage all the connections between components. You can make guitar pedals without using PCBs, but I recommend starting out with a PCB-based kit. There are other types of components you'll see in some types of pedals, but these are the main types you'll see over and over again. Now that you have a good idea on what all the components and hardware looks like, let's walk through the general steps you'll follow when building a guitar pedal. The first step is to get all of your components and hardware together. If you buy a kit, this step is easy. Otherwise, you'll need to order everything including the enclosure, PCB, components, and wires. The next step is to start populating the PCB. This means looking at your diagram or instructions and sorting out the components to figure out what goes where. In my pedal build videos, I explain this step in detail and what to do if the kit you buy doesn't come with instructions. The popular Klon Centaur clone kit I bought didn't come with any instructions, so in that build video I explain how to figure out where each of the components go. You can follow that video's advice to populate any PCB you buy that doesn't come with clear instructions. The basic idea here is that you match up the correct components to the correct position, place it into the correct position in the right orientation, then solder it into position. Getting this step right is crucial. If you do something like install the wrong resistor in a position or install a transistor the wrong way, your pedal just won't work. So take the time to double check every component before you solder them in. Some people will do this one component at a time to avoid mixing things up. Other people prefer to insert all of one type of component, then solder all of them at once. For example, you might start by placing all of the resistors in place, then solder them all in one go. Then add all of the diodes, then solder them, then all the capacitors, and so on. Figure out what works best for you and make sure you pay close attention to components that need to be installed in a specific orientation. This step can be quick and easy for simple circuits or a long process for larger projects. Just take your time to make sure you get it right. Once all the components are soldered into the PCB, the next important step is to test the circuit. Now you might be tempted at this stage to throw everything into the pedal enclosure, but resist that temptation. Testing your circuit before you place it into the enclosure is important. If there's a problem with your circuit, it's much easier to figure out what's going wrong now rather than later when it's all wired up in a pedal enclosure. To test your pedal, you connect your guitar cables to the pedal circuit using wires and alligator clips, then power it with a battery or a suitable power supply. If everything checks out at this stage, you can move on to the next step. Or if anything is wrong and the effect doesn't sound right, or you get no signal at all, you can start trying to figure out the issue. The next step is to prepare the pedal enclosure. You can do this step earlier if you want, especially if you'll need time for paint to dry. You might need to drill holes for the knobs, foot switch, LEDs, or jacks, or your enclosure might come pre-drilled. Once all the holes are drilled, you can finish the enclosure using a wide range of different methods. You can polish the enclosure, you can spray paint it with plain paints or special finish paints, you can hand paint it, etch a design into it, hydro dip it, use decals, get it engraved, or a lot of other finishing methods. While you can just leave your pedal with a raw metal look, it's worth the effort to give your pedal enclosure a nice finish. It won't make your tone sound any better, but it does make your pedal look so much better than a raw and unfinished pedal enclosure. The next step is to wire up your pedal circuit into the pedal enclosure. This involves wiring up the foot switch, connecting the input and output jacks, and wiring up a battery or external power supply. Once it's all wired up, test it again, then screw in the jacks and any knobs to finish it off. Now let's look at the common types of guitar pedals people build. You can find PCBs and kits for most types of guitar or bass effects, but many effects use quite complex circuits. For example, the most common type of DIY guitar pedal you'll see available is fuzz. While some fuzz pedals can be complicated, many are ridiculously simple, like the classic fuzz face. My video of the 7-minute fuzz pedal build shows how simple fuzz circuits can be. Here are some examples of PCBs for different types of effects, but keep in mind there can be a wide range of complexity in circuits, even for something as simple as a fuzz pedal. Overdrive, boost, or any type of drive or dirt pedal are by far the most common group of effect pedals people build. They're often simple circuits, but you can easily find complex projects that pack in a lot of features or variety of sounds. You can find clones for countless well-known drive pedals, as well as plenty of mods to experiment with. Some pedal builders never move away from drive pedals because there's so much you can do with them. Buffers, signal splitters, or other types of bypass pedals are good pedals to build because they're usually very simple and handy to have on big pedal boards. Compressors aren't as common, but they're often fairly simple to build. Reverb pedals are usually complex circuits, especially for a good sounding one. You can find digital reverb projects as well as spring reverb projects. Delays are quite common, but they can often be quite complex circuits. Tremolo is a fun effect to experiment with, especially if you really want to get into this hobby and work towards building your own effects from scratch. You can learn a lot about how circuits work by experimenting with a tremolo circuit. Phasers can be quite complex, but I think they're a great effect to mod. If you have a phaser like the classic Phase 90, or you want to build a clone of one, there are mods you can use to add more knobs and control over the effect. The Phase 90 only has one knob, so it's a great example of how mods can be used to add more to an effect pedal. Chorus and similar modulation effects aren't as common as they're often complex circuits, especially if you want a good sounding effect. Same with wahs, volume pedals, and EQ pedals. They're often simple circuits, but not very common with pedal builders. Expression pedal enclosures, like what you use for wahs and volume pedals, unfortunately they're not very cheap, so if you were thinking about using one in your project, you might find that buying a cheap second-hand external expression pedal is the best way to go. Of course, there are other types of effects you'll see from time to time, but this gives you a quick overview of what people seem to prefer building. Now, to get started building guitar pedals, I recommend starting as simple as possible for your first attempt. While you may have your eyes on a complex pedal kit, hold off on it until you're able to build at least one simple pedal. Pick a simple fuzz or drive pedal as a way to practice your soldering and wiring skills. The chances are that you'll make a mistake or two in the first build, which is perfectly normal. Trying to find a mistake in a pedal with 5 or so components is much easier than trying to find a mistake in a complex circuit with dozens of components. While you can buy all the equipment and tools I've talked about in this video, start out with the essentials and see if you like building pedals or not. Then after 1 or 2 builds, you can decide whether you want to continue and buy the other optional tools and equipment. After you've ordered your tools and equipment and you wait for your pedal kit to arrive, it's a good idea to watch a few pedal build videos so you can get an idea of the basic steps you'll need to follow. After watching a few videos of other people building pedals, you'll notice the same general steps and process. Don't worry if you can't find a video that matches the exact pedal you want to build. Just watching people handle and solder components can help prepare you for your own builds. If you watch my 7-minute fuzz pedal build video and my Klon Centaur build video, you'll see that while they're very different circuits and the Klon uses far more components than the fuzz pedal, the same overall steps are used. So once you've built a simple pedal, you'll feel more confident taking on a more complicated pedal. Check out my detailed guide on building guitar pedals on my website and leave any questions you have in the comments here. I'll do my best to help you out wherever I can. If you want more tutorials like this or pedal build videos, let me know in the comments what you would like me to cover in the future. Good luck with your pedal builds and I'll talk to you next time.